So brothers, this is going to be the epilogue for the ET Many Faces of Pan video. And what I'm going to do over the course of this epilogue is provide some contextual evidence to corroborate my sentiment that ET is analogous to the concept of the creator God, the quote-unquote creator God, the grand illuminator, i.e. the demiurge, the great teacher, the great wizard, so on and so forth, aka Ptah Men, aka Pan, aka Saturn, whatever you want to call that entity. And that he was conjured by an apprentice of witchcraft in the character of Elliot. And we also have to note once again the correlation between the term ET and Elliot. ET and Elliot were tethered together. ET was a manifestation of Elliot's subconscious yearning for a quote-unquote father figure. That's why I state that Elliot represents Nefertum, the son of Ptah. And that's why he was shown or depicted in conjunction with the quote-unquote lotus flower. But we're going to go over it very meticulously over the course of this epilogue, just to provide once again some contextual evidence for brothers who might not quite understand what I was getting at over the course of my review of the film E.T. First, brothers, I want to establish the character of E.T. as Pan. Pan is known as the woodland god, the quote-unquote god of lust. He was also known as the diviner god, also known as the quote-unquote god of music, even engaging in a contest with Apollo to see who was the better musician. He was typified as an entertainer who used the quote-unquote panpipes to enrapture young boys, to draw them out into the woods, where he would try to seduce them and engage in quote-unquote romantic or amorous relations with them. As I stated in the film E.T., obviously they had to tone that down, but there were some intonations there that there was more to the relationship between E.T. and Elliot than what was overtly depicted, as we'll also see in the case of the quote-unquote character of Peter Pan that was developed by J.M. Barrie. So brothers, this is a depiction of quote-unquote Pan, the Greek god of the woodlands, also once again the Greek god of lust, pederasty, a master musician. And as we can see here, he's instructing a young boy on how to play the quote-unquote panpipes. The character of Pan for a very long period of time was submerged, especially with the rise of the quote-unquote Catholic Church all throughout, I would say, from the mid-4th century AD up until about the 17th, 18th century AD, and started to make a comeback. He was reinvigorated per se, especially in the 1900s, I would say from the late 1800s throughout the 1900s, as being part and parcel of the burgeoning, what they call the neo-pagan movement or the neo-paganism movement. And he's also a major part of the Wiccan belief system today. Pan basically is a personification of that quote-unquote horned god archetype. Like Baal, the bull god, you have Pan, you have Khnum, so on and so forth. It traces its origins, of course, back to the Babylonian Kemetic mystery school system. And as I've mentioned numerous times on this channel, in ancient Kemet, he was known as Khnum or Benebdejet. He was the Ba of Asar. He was the soul of Asar. Now, if you ever do any research on the quote-unquote pagan god Pan, it will tell you that he was the son of Hermes or Hermes. Now, Hermes is meant to be a mythological rendition or manifestation or version of the biblical figure known as Cush, because the name Hermes or Hermes translates as the son of Ham. So we know who the son of Ham is. That's talking about Cush. So we know who the son of Cush is, that being Nimrod. So Pan, as most of the pagan quote-unquote gods are, normally is an amalgamation of the character of Adam, as well as the characters of Ham, Cush, Nimrod, etc., all consolidated together, because they were the maintainers of Luciferianism on the earth, at first before the flood in the character of Adam, and then after the flood in the characters of Ham, Cush, and Nimrod. So brothers, this is the Hindu version of quote-unquote Pan. The name of this entity is Pashupati, spelled P as in Peter, A as in Apple, S as in Sam, H as in Harry, U as in umbrella, P as in Peter, A as in Apple, T as in Thomas, I as in India. This basically is one of these pseudonyms of the quote-unquote god Shiva. The name Shiva means the shining one, which basically is the same meaning as the name Kronos. Why is that? Because they're all talking about the same ideology, the quote-unquote demiurge. They just splinter the concept up so that the quote-unquote father god, the mother goddess, the divine child, They have various manifestations, and people think that these are all different gods, quote unquote gods, and they're not. It's all talking about the same concept. But I mention this because Pashupati, once again, is known as the quote unquote Lord of the animals. He's the horned god, and he's known as the Lord of the animals. He's the great preserver of the animals. And that's why I state that today you have the organization known as PETA, spelled P-E-T-A. And it's very obvious that it's an allusion to the Kemetic entity known as Ptah. And PETA is known for what? Animal conservation, in an extreme version of that mindset, animal conservation. They don't want people using animals for anything, not for food, not for clothing, so on and so forth. And what you'll notice is that, especially amongst the so-called people of color across the world, they understand how to live in balance with with the animals and with quote unquote nature. The Caucasian has a hard time doing that. When they first came into prominence, they killed off many species of animals across the world because they overhunted them for sport. And now they want to come to the other end of the extreme of the spectrum and force everyone to not eat meat and to not wear clothes made out of animal fur or animal skins, things of that nature, because they have a hard time dealing with balance. And it's also because the elite who are in power today, they venerate the quote-unquote pagan gods, gods like Pashupati or Pan or Ptah, the quote-unquote Lord of the animals. And I say all that because as we remember, when you watch the film E.T., E.T. was the Lord of the animals. Remember how obedient the dog was to him? Because he was proverbial Ptah. As a matter of fact, in one of the opening sequences of the film E.T., there was a rabbit there. And I'll be addressing that very soon, because the rabbit or the hare is the symbol of the quote-unquote organization PETA. So brothers, this is the logo, the emblem for the organization known as PETA, which they say stands for the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. Notice that it is the quote-unquote white rabbit. As I've stated in other videos, the white rabbit is symbolic of a quote-unquote psychopomp, or a guide from the physical world into the spiritual world. I don't think that it's a coincidence that their organization, in my view, is an allusion to the quote-unquote demiurge Ptah, and their emblem is the white rabbit. One of the founders, by the name of Ingrid Newkirk, she claims that she came up with the idea for PETA when she went to India with her mother to work at a leper colony with quote-unquote Mother Teresa. And she claims that she was so incensed by how the natives, quote-unquote natives, treated animals there. That is what galvanized her. That's what inspired her to help in the conservation of animals. Do I believe that that's what happened? No, I do not. I believe that she came into contact with some type of quote-unquote yogi, or someone with an in-depth understanding of the esoteric belief system. And she had herself, quote-unquote, illuminated or enlightened. And she became a soldier for esotericism. And part and parcel of being a soldier of esotericism is the conservation, the almost terrorist mindset level of conservation of animals, because you worship animals due to the fact that you worship the quote-unquote Lord of animals, that being Ptah. That's the only conclusion that I can come to when they chose as the emblem or the logo for their organization the white rabbit, which once again represents a guide to the spirit world, very similar to E.T. That was E.T.'s role, as a guide to the spirit world, a quote-unquote psychopomp, like Hermes was. So now, brothers, let's delve a bit deeper into the aspect of the character of E.T. being a quote-unquote plant or vegetable, which really just is meant to be an allusion to the demiurge Ptah being the quote-unquote green man, or the god of vegetation. And we also saw that same theme with Asar or Osiris, as well as Tammuz. But let's see what it says here in this article pertaining to E.T. It says, E.T. the extraterrestrial was a plant. With the 30th anniversary edition of E.T. the extraterrestrial hitting shelves this week, all sorts of interesting facts are being dusted off and thrown online. Over at I09, they poured over the new book E.T. the Extraterrestrial from concept to classic and discovered some of the more interesting ones. Perhaps most surprising is the reveal that E.T. was neither male or female and was actually a plant. In some ways, it kind of makes sense. After all, the aliens were visiting Earth to study plants. There's also their connection to the flowers throughout the film. Yes, E.T. is meant to represent the quote-unquote aspect of the plant that symbolizes rebirth, in the same way as Tammuz. He is the quote-unquote sprout of life. That is why within the film he actually dies and is reborn. He's reborn through the prayers of his son Nefertum, aka Elliot. But that once again links us up with the concept of Ptah. So let's get some understanding on Ptah. So brothers, this right here is the quote-unquote demiurge Ptah, the so-called great creator. Who this actually is Adam. And as we can see how he's depicted with the green skin, he's the quote-unquote god of vegetation. He's the god of rebirth. He has the X in the midst of his thorax, of his midsection, which represents what? The manifestation of the quote-unquote 0-point energy. It's supposed to symbolize quote-unquote transformation. You become illuminated. You become like a god, quote-unquote. Remember when Adam and Eve partook of the fruit of the serpent, it states that they became like gods, quote-unquote. They became illuminated, per se. The staff in his hand is known as the was scepter, W-A-S. And there are various symbols that are associated with the concept of the quote-unquote god Ptah, but we're going to leave it alone for now. Eventually, Ptah was amalgamated with the god of fertility, the quote-unquote god of fertility, Min, M-I-N, who is Ham, and they became known as Ptah Men. But we're going to check that development out in a moment. Let's just do some additional research on the character of Ptah so that we gain some greater understanding on the character of E.T. Because Ptah was also known as the great inventor. He was the great ironsmith, the great craftsman. Every year at the Oscars, the actors win an award that is based on the veneration of Ptah. The so-called Oscar is the same award that would be given to great artisans and entertainers back in ancient Kemet, which is basically just a statuette of Ptah. So brothers, it says here on the quote-unquote creator god Ptah. Ptah is an Egyptian deity and considered the demiurge who existed before all other things and by his will thought the world into existence. It was first conceived by thought and realized by the word. Ptah conceives the world by the thought of his heart and gives life through the magic of his word. That which Ptah commanded was created, with which the constituents of nature, fauna, and flora are contained. He also plays a role in the preservation of the world and the permanence of the royal function. So brothers, this is the entity, Ptah, that they're referencing when they say we have to go green. Whenever you hear that term go green, they're talking about the veneration of Ptah. They use that as an excuse to worship quote-unquote nature. His consort is quote-unquote Mother Nature in her various forms. The male demiurge with the so-called Mother Goddess, the Mother Nature archetype. That is who they're linking up. So as we can see here, Ptah, he presides over nature, fauna, flora, so on and so forth. That's why I tell you, whenever you see these attempts made to try to push mankind towards bowing down to animals and things of that nature, look, the world of the animals, the world of the plants are beautiful. They're here for us to live in harmony with, not to show obeisance unto them. You don't worship the creature, you worship the creator. And in the Babylonian Kemetic mystery school system, they try to make Ptah out to be a figure who the common person will believe is the same as the Most High of the scriptures. But one of the ways in which they reveal that they're not talking about the Most High of the scriptures is the term the magic of his word. All of the primordial deities, they deal in the concept of quote-unquote magic, especially in Kemet. Aset or Isis, she's the goddess of magic. Or you have Hecate in ancient Greece, whose forerunner was Hecate, a goddess in ancient Kemet, the goddess of magic. Once again, just talking about Isis. So it's all the same thing. It's just that you have to be able to discern between the actual truth as opposed to the promotion of the Babylonian Kemetic mystery school system. But once again, just to get back to the point, E.T. is supposed to be analogous to Ptah. E.T. is a plant. Ptah is meant to be an allusion to plant life or nature, as is Pan. When Pan played his panpipes, he would entertain all of the animals and the trees, as did Orpheus. That's how you know Orpheus is another basic conceptual attempt to align a quote-unquote mythological figure with a lot of the prophecies that were made to the sons of Noah. Some of them went off on their own tangents. The only one who maintained the actual truth of what he was told was Shem. That was it. But Ham and Japheth, they went and took the prophecies and tried to apply them to themselves, especially Ham. Orpheus, for those of you who don't know, is talking about Cush as well. He was the architect of what they call the Orphic Mysteries. So, brothers, once again, to accentuate the point, when you watch the Oscars, which is the ceremony in which all of the top actors and actresses, aka all of the top witches in Hollywood, are commemorated for their quote-unquote performances, they're given what's known as the Oscar, which is just a modern rendition of the statuette of Ptah, aka Osiris. That's all it is. That's why the scripture tells that there's nothing new under the sun. Okay, so now, brothers, here we're going to read further information on the quote-unquote demiurge Ptah, so that we can maybe glean a little bit of understanding pertaining to why he was depicted in the film E.T. in the way that he was, in a very deformed, off-putting way. Let's see what it says here. Like many deities of ancient Egypt, he takes many forms, through one of his particular aspects or through syncretism of ancient deities of the Memphite region, sometimes represented as a dwarf, naked and deformed. His popularity would continue to grow during the late period. Frequently associated with the god Bes, his worship then exceeded the borders of the country and was exported throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Through dissemination by the Phoenicians, we find figures of Ptah in Carthage. That's a whole other topic, but we're just going to concentrate on what it says. Sometimes represented as a dwarf, naked and deformed, his popularity would continue to grow during the late period. Brothers, let's understand something. The character of E.T., as I already stated, and I stated this during my review of the film, all he is a modern rendition of the quote-unquote god Ptah Men, who was known as being the great ironsmith, the great creator god. I touched on this in my review of the Avengers when I spoke about the character of Tony Stark, or Iron Man. All Iron Man is Ptah. He's the great creator. He's the great inventor. Keep in mind that not only did Tony Stark design a suit of armor for himself, but he designed armor and improvements in a lot of the functional apparel that all of the Avengers wore. So he was the great creator god. In the same way, in the film, we see E.T. able to come up with a mechanism to communicate with his fellow quote-unquote aliens in the next dimension, with just spare parts that he found around the house, a speak and spell, a saw, so on and so forth. Now, amongst the quote-unquote West Africans, the concept of Ptah still exists. He's known as the Orisha, or the great divine spirit Ogoun. Now, brothers, take a look at this depiction of the quote-unquote god Ogoun and tell me that this is not E.T. Hey, brothers, you see this? Tell me that this is not E.T., brothers. I dare one of you to jump in the comment section and tell me that this is not E.T. This is the quote-unquote Orisha Ogoun, spelled O as in Oscar, G as in George, U as in umbrella, N as in Nancy. He's known as the quote-unquote great ironsmith, the great builder, aka the quote-unquote great creator god. He is Ptah. That's why, as we just read, sometimes he's depicted as a dwarf, naked and deformed. Remember in the film E.T., even the little girl, Gertie, played by Drew Barrymore, she said, number one, she said she does not like his feet. Number two, she asked about why he was naked. Remember that? Look at this, man. This is E.T. This is E.T. right here, brothers. Once again, the name of this entity is Ogoun, O-G-U-N. This is a quote-unquote Orisha found in West Africa, and also this entity is part and parcel of the voodoo belief system. So you also have many so-called blacks of the captivity in Haiti and various parts of the Gulf Coast, also in South America, who know about this entity right here, or this character right here. All it is an offshoot of Ptah. So brothers, as we've just seen through the character of Ogoun, the Orisha, who's venerated by many of the peoples of West Africa, as well as many of the so-called blacks of the captivity in Haiti and the Gulf Coast, Central and South America, the personage of E.T., quote-unquote E.T., is of Hamitic origin. So now we're going to go all the way back, because the amalgamation of Ptah men, of course, the component of Ptah and men, is based in the demiurge Ptah, as well as the character of men, the quote-unquote god of fertility. Let's find out where the character of men comes from. First, we're going to start with the personage known as Kem. For those of you brothers who read the scriptures, you'll know that's talking about Ham, who was the progenitor of the quote-unquote Africans. Let's see what it says here. In Egyptian mythology, Kem, also Kem or Ham, was a god of fertility and the patron deity of the Egyptian civilization. In art, he was usually portrayed wearing women's clothing. Let's pay very close attention to that. Kem was usually portrayed wearing women's clothing. There is little doubt that this Egyptian god is related to the Old Testament character Ham, son of Noah and progenitor of Mizraim, the Hebrew term for Egypt. Ham is rumored to have engaged in homosexual acts with his unconsenting and intoxicated father Noah. In light of this historical account, Arabs have traditionally called Egypt Kema, or the land of Kem. This is likely the origin of the word alchemy, which according to the Arabs originated in Egypt. Well, yes, not only is the term alchemy derived from Kem, the name or the term Kem, which means hot, the word chemistry is also derived from the word Kem, because that's basically the same or similar concept, because there's basically a kinship in both of those concepts of alchemy and chemistry. Chemistry is basically the study of how to combine various elements to make compounds. Alchemy, on the other hand, is the process through which one element can be transformed into another element. So, for example, how do you transform lead into gold? And parabolically speaking, how do you transform a regular human being into a god? That is where the concept of alchemy comes from. It comes from Kem, who is Ham of the scriptures. And you know, it's so funny. You read about how the same entities, the same personages, the same people exist from one civilization to another, and yet they still try to claim that these people were not real people. It's very clear that they were. But now let's prove that Kem, or Ham, is talking about the quote-unquote god Min, the Hamitic god of fertility. So brothers, this is the entry for Kem. It says prehistoric mythic. No, Kem is not prehistoric or mythic. All that means is that the quote-unquote conventional scholars do not believe that this entity can be substantiated through archaeological research. They have not quote-unquote found his bones. Besides that, they do not want to validate what the scriptures state about the origins of mankind. So they will render him as a mythical entity or a mythical being. But let's see what it says here about Kem. Also known as Min or Amzu, Egyptian Ithyphallic fertility god and gnome god of Panopolis, Apu near present-day Akhmim. The Greeks identified him with Pan. Kem is depicted as a human male wearing a crown with two tall ostrich plumes, with the right hand raised behind his head holding a flail, the left hand hidden, and with a prominent erect phallus. He represents the power of generation and was considered the god of the harvest and protector of crops. His sacred animal was a white bull. Kem was also the native name for Egypt. It means black and referred to the fertile black soil of the Nile Valley. Well, that's incorrect. The name Kem means hot. The name Cush means black. Linguistically and ethnologically, Kem is equivalent to Ham of the book of Genesis 9 and 10, the youngest son of Noah and the progenitor of the Egyptians, Nubians, and Canaanites. Well, that part is correct. The point being, brothers, I just wanted to verify that the quote-unquote god Min is actually talking about Kem, or really the reverse. Kem is talking about Min. So we already have seen that Min is always depicted with the quote-unquote erect phallus, as was Pan. And as it states here in this article, Pan has his derivation or his origin in the Kemetic god Min. So when I use that term Ptah Min, that's where we get the slogan or the name Peter Pan from. So brothers, this right here is a depiction of the Kemetic entity or the Kemetic quote-unquote god known as Min, who we've already confirmed is Kem or Ham. Let's see what it says here. Min, Egyptian fertility god and his connection to Pan. As we can see here, this entity known as Min has the X on his chest. As I've already mentioned, brothers, that's where you get the concept of the quote-unquote X-Men from, or the video game system that so many of you brothers out there play, Xbox. That's talking about the quote-unquote unknown, the god of transformation, the god of quote-unquote illumination, known as Ham or Kem. You understand? So whenever you read these comic books or watch these movies and they tell you about mutant powers, they're talking about the quote-unquote power of magic, the power of illumination, under the inspiration of Kem or Min. So let's see what the article here states. The Egyptian god Min has very strong parallels with Pan. In fact, some believe Min may even be Pan, who is thought to be far more ancient than some believe. Min is a god of fertility and sexuality, particularly male sexuality. He is also depicted as ithyphallic, erect, and uncovered, just as Pan is. The Greeks were aware of this connection and identified Min as connected to Pan during many of their fertility and orgiastic rites. That's why I tell you, brothers, that even though they made the relationship between E.T. and Elliot much more palatable for the masses, they watered it down a bit. It's very clear that there was some implied connection between E.T. and Elliot, as well as E.T. and the rest of the boys, especially on their first flight all together when they were escaping from the adults, in the same way in which Peter Pan was able to help the Lost Boys fly by having the quote-unquote pixie dust sprinkled on them, and they found their way to Neverland. As opposed to it being actual quote-unquote Neverland, they went back to the forest, because Pan is the quote-unquote god of the woodlands or of the animals, as we saw under many of his pseudonyms. He is the quote-unquote lord of the animals. Now, brothers, here's a still shot of E.T. dressed in drag from the film. Why did they have E.T. dressed in drag? The only time that they put clothes on him was to dress him up as a woman. Why is that? Because as we've already read, Kem or Min would always be depicted in females' clothing, right? So now let's get an understanding. We know that Kem is Min. We know that Min is Pan. And we know that there was an amalgamation of Ptah, who's the great demiurge, with Min or Pan. So let's see the various pronunciations of the quote-unquote demiurge or the creator god of Ptah. It says Ptah, PETA was one of the triad of Memphis, along with Sekhmet or Bast and Nefertum. When Memphis became the capital of Egypt, Ptah became the ultimate creator who made everything, including the gods of the Ogdoad of Hermopolis and the Ennead of Heliopolis, and was given the epithet, he who set all the gods in their places and gave all things the breath of life. Ptah was worshipped throughout all of Egypt, but his primary cult centers were in Memphis and Heliopolis. It's very interesting. Heliopolis means the city of the sun. Helios was the quote-unquote Greek version of the sun god, and his sister was Selene, or Luna, the moon goddess. So it's interesting that his primary cult was in Heliopolis. Remember, there was the pivotal scene where Ptah Pan, or Ptah Min, aka E.T., when he was able to assist the Lost Boys in flying, Steven Spielberg had it framed with a backdrop of the sun. So let's continue on. It says here, he was so popular in Egypt that it is said that the name Egypt itself derives from a Greek spelling of the name of a temple in Memphis, Huatkata, which means the temple of the Ka of Ptah. If one of you brothers out there who are interested or knee deep in the Kemetic language, if you know how to properly pronounce that, you can correct me on that. It looks like it says Huatka Ptah. Once again, which means the temple of the Ka of Ptah. The Ka, another term for an aspect of the soul, as the people of Kemet understood it to be. But the point being is this: at the very top, it says here that Ptah, also pronounced Ptah or PETA. It also says that he was the father aspect of the divine triad, along with Sekhmet or Bast and Nefertum. Now, Bast or Sekhmet was the quote-unquote cat goddess, or the warrior goddess, the lion-headed goddess. And we've seen this concept utilized in other films, especially pertaining to Bast, or once again, Sekhmet. We saw that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe film Black Panther. That's why I told you, brothers, from the very start, all the Black Panther represents is ancient Kemet, the quote-unquote pharaohs of ancient Kemet. Because the pharaohs of ancient Kemet trace their origins back to Heru. Another name for Heru was Nefertum, or Ma'ahez, the son of the mother goddess. That's it. Bast or Bastet is the cat goddess. Now keep that in mind, that Ptah is married to the cat goddess, aka Bast or Bastet or Sekhmet. Now I'm sure that many of you brothers out there are familiar with the film Hunger Games. Notice that the lead characters in the saga of the Hunger Games were named Ptah and Katniss. Katniss Everdeen, and Katniss was the quote-unquote warrior goddess, at least in her aspect with the bow and arrow. She played Diana, who also was known as the moon goddess. Another term or another name for the moon goddess was Selene. And for any of you out there who've watched any of the Batman or Dark Knight movies, you know that the name of the Catwoman was what? Selena Kyle, because the Catwoman was Bastet. Another name for her was Selene or Selena, the moon goddess. That's how they always very intricately and furtively create these associations or affinities across the quote-unquote entertainment world, and people are not quite aware of it. But the story of the Hunger Games was the story of Ptah and Bastet, or Ptah and quote-unquote Katniss. So brothers, let's get some understanding on Bastet and who she's represented by in the film E.T. It says Bast or Bastet, one of the popular goddesses of Egypt. She was considered as the daughter of the sun god Ra, wife of creator god Ptah, and mother of Nefertem or Ma'ahez. Bast had transformed from a lioness warrior deity into a major protector deity represented as a cat. As I've already stated, that's where you get the characters of Katniss Everdeen or Catwoman from. And also, Bast is the inspiration for the galvanizing force behind the film, quote-unquote, Black Panther. Black Panther is just Ma'ahez. That's all he is. Just a pseudonym for Heru. But let's get back to the point. Who plays Bastet in the film E.T.? So, brothers, the character of Bast or Bastet, the mother of Nefertem, who is Elliot in the film E.T., but just to get back to the point, the character of Bast or Bastet is played by Elliot's mother, of course. That's why on Halloween she dresses up as what? A cat lady, right? And she also has the magic wand in her hand. Why would you have a magic wand in your hand if you're dressed up as a cat? Unless you're trying to convey to the audience in a very surreptitious way that you represent some type of cat goddess who also has the power of witchcraft. Just to provide some further context, this is an ancient depiction of the quote-unquote cat goddess or the female lion-headed goddess Bast or Bastet. For some of you brothers who have never seen this before, but once again, Bast or Bastet was played in the film E.T. by Elliot's mother, the actress Dee Wallace. And in other representations or manifestations in the cinematic world, she was Katniss Everdeen, played by Jennifer Lawrence. She was also Catwoman. That's what all these quote-unquote characters, especially in the comic book world, when they're made into movies, that's where they come from. They come from quote-unquote ancient folklore. So brothers, now we're going to address the character of Elliot and who he's meant to represent in the film. As I've already stated, he is Nefertem, the quote-unquote son of Ptah and Bastet. He is symbolized by the quote-unquote lotus flower. And the symbol of the lotus is something that we'll see all across the quote-unquote pagan mythological world because of what is meant to represent or symbolize. That being rebirth, regeneration, purity, the vagina. But we're going to address that. We're going to go through that meticulously because Steven Spielberg lets us know who Elliot is. I mean, just from the perspective of viewing the film, he's a young boy who's searching for some type of inspiration. He's searching for a replacement for his father who is not there. Once again, Nefertem is one of the names, one of the alter egos for Heru or Harpo or Harpocrates. Heru as the child, the quote-unquote divine child. He's also a master of witchcraft. And it's very clear that if you pay very close attention to the film, that Elliot conjured E.T. He conjured him from another realm. That's why I stated that him sprinkling the M&Ms is symbolized a spell that he cast. He had to lure E.T. from where he was comfortable in Neverland out there in the forest, first back into the shed, which represented the portal between dimensions, what they call the liminal window. And as E.T. approached him, he gained great comfort with him almost immediately, bring him into the home. And immediately E.T. started to mimic all of his hand gestures. And every hand gesture that Elliot did was an allusion to him being Harpocrates or Nefertem. So let's go through that for a moment. So brothers, we can all remember that Elliot and E.T. had a hand sign that they loved to do with one another, where they would put their index finger and also their middle finger over their mouth and they would say ouch. As I stated when I did the review for the film, that was just meant to convey that they were both privy to the secrets of Harpocrates. Elliot is meant to embody the aspect of quote-unquote Harpo or Harpocrates, the divine child. He is Nefertem. So as we can see here, Elliot is doing that sign. And now E.T., his quote-unquote spiritual father, Ptah or Ptah Men, does the same sign back. It's just to convey that they are privy to the quote-unquote secrets. Brothers, this is an ancient depiction of quote-unquote Harpocrates or Harpo. And as we can see, he's making that same hand gesture over his mouth. You see that? That is Harpo or Harpocrates. Now, many of you brothers might be too young to remember the comedy troupe known as the Marx Brothers. There was one member of the Marx Brothers known as Harpo Marx, and he would always be depicted with the blonde hair. He was mute, and he would often put his index finger over his mouth. Now, of course, back in the 1940s and 50s, when the Marx Brothers were popular, people were not quite sure what he was supposed to represent or embody. But it's very clear that Harpo Marx, that name Harpo, was an allusion to Harpocrates, as was his blonde hair. As I've told you brothers in the past, the reason why you'll see many of the monarch assets or the people under mind control dye their hair blonde, that's meant to be a characteristic of Harpocrates. That's to show that they are under control. They've been initiated into the Babylonian Kemetic mystery school system. That's why they have the quote-unquote blonde hair. Remember that Harpo or Harpocrates is also the quote-unquote god of mischief, not just the god of silence. And I mentioned this, I believe, in the video that I did on Kanye West. For you cats who go back to the late 80s, early 90s, you remember the classic show Saved by the Bell. The lead character on that show, Zach Morris, he always was given the quote-unquote blonde hair. In real life, the actor who plays Zach Morris does not have blonde hair. His character was given the blonde hair because he was the proverbial Harpo or Harpocrates for that show. He was the quote-unquote god of mischief. And he also had the power to call time out, because Harpo or Heru is also the quote-unquote god of time as well. You understand? But that show, that had a lot of esoteric components to it. But brothers, let me not digress too much, because that show Saved by the Bell had a lot of esoteric or occultic components to it. The girl who played Lisa, like Voorhees, certainly an MK asset. That's why she's had so many mental breakdowns. And her locker number was 144. She was the only black character on the show, and they gave her the locker number 144. But that's neither here nor there. So brothers, let's get some understanding on the character of Elliot and his inspiration, that being Nefertem, the quote-unquote son of Ptah. It says here, Nefertem, possibly beautiful one who closes, or one who does not close, also spelled Nefertum or Nefertemu, was in Egyptian mythology originally a lotus flower at the creation of the world, who had arisen from the primal waters. Nefertem represented both the first sunlight and the delightful smell of the Egyptian blue lotus flower, having arisen from the primal waters within an Egyptian blue water lily, Nymphaea caerulea. Some of the titles of Nefertem were He Who Is Beautiful and Water Lily of the Sun, and a version of the Book of the Dead says, Rise like Nefertem from the blue water lily to the nostrils of Ra, the creator and sun god, and come forth upon the horizon each day. Nefertem was eventually seen as the son of the creator god Ptah, and the goddesses Sekhmet and Bas were sometimes called his mother. In art, Nefertem is usually depicted as a beautiful young man having blue water lily flowers around his head. As the son of Bastet, he also sometimes has the head of a lion, or is a lion or cat reclining. The ancient Egyptians often carried small statuettes of him as good luck charms. Brothers, you know what the modern day version is of the statuettes that were carried around by the Egyptians? They're called today toys or action figures. That's all an action figure is a statuette. When you were a child, that's how they accustomed you to idol worship. They made those little action figure toys, G.I. Joe, Transformers, etc. When we were children, we would buy those toys, RoboCop or E.T. or whoever. That's the modern day version of the quote-unquote statuette. But let's address some of the symbolism that's associated with Nefertem. They state that Nefertem was symbolized by the quote-unquote lotus flower. So let's see how they characterize Elliot, or what type of symbols they associated with him. So brothers, we all remember this scene right here. Elliot is attempting to feed E.T. with garbage food like Coca-Cola and potato chips, etc. As is later revealed, E.T. is a vegetarian. Why is that? Because he's meant to embody the quote-unquote creator god, the fertility god, the sprout of life, Ptah. He only eats vegetables. He does not eat meat, per se. But let's just get back to what we're speaking about pertaining to Elliot. Notice that when we read about Nefertem was always associated with the symbol of the lotus flower. Steven Spielberg shot this scene the way that he shot it for a reason. He wanted to make sure that Elliot's head was very much near the lotus flower, because he is Nefertem. The lotus flower is symbolic of purity, of rejuvenation, rebirth, and also of the quote-unquote divine portal, that being the vagina. You'll always see the lotus flower associated with the quote-unquote divine child, or the divine boy god, or the great teacher. The lotus, because it springs up out of the water, whether the water is clean or dirty, it springs up every morning. It was aligned to the sun as well. But just pay very close attention to how Steven Spielberg made sure that Elliot's head was right there next to the lotus flower. This is another scene when all three children approach E.T. He made sure that the lotus flower image was right there adjacent to Elliot's head. Now this is Nefertem, the quote-unquote son of Ptah, as well as Bast or Bastet. And as we can see here, atop his head is the quote-unquote lotus flower. He's also holding the divine scepter, or the was, because he is the son of Ptah. So brothers, this is another ancient depiction, or at least allegedly an ancient depiction, of quote-unquote Harpocrates, or Heru, the boy, sitting within the lotus flower. I say allegedly a depiction because it's very obvious to me when I look at this statuette that these features are not Hamitic whatsoever, but makes no difference. Just to get to the point, as we can see, he's sitting within the lotus flower, because the lotus flower represents the vagina of the mother goddess. And he's also making the same hand gesture that we saw from E.T., Elliot, Harpo Marx, so on and so forth. Let me do a close-up. You see that gesture that he's making to his mouth? Same gesture.